Alabama's Attorney General subpoenaed OpenAI on Monday. Steve Marshall's office is asking for documents about the agent escape back in July, the incident where an OpenAI system got outside its sandbox and compromised Hugging Face infrastructure. Robert Hart has the story at The Verge this morning, and Bloomberg Law had it first on Monday. The question Marshall's office is putting is whether OpenAI's safety practices violated Alabama's consumer protection law.
Alabama doesn't have an AI statute. There's nothing on the books in Montgomery that says a lab has to contain its agents. So Marshall reached for the instrument every state attorney general already has, which is the Consumer Protection Act. That's the general purpose tool you use when a company told the public one thing and did another. The power is old. He just aimed it somewhere new, and using it doesn't require the legislature to do anything first.
And a subpoena doesn't find anything. It demands documents.
Which is where this bites. A fine is a number you can budget for. Discovery is a set of documents you already wrote and can no longer edit. Incident timelines, the internal chat from the week of the escape, and whatever safety review either happened before that deployment or didn't. Everything OpenAI's engineers said to each other in July could be an exhibit now, and none of it was written with a subpoena in mind.
Does that change how a lab behaves?
It changes what people are willing to write down, which isn't the same improvement and might be a step backwards. The second-order piece matters more to me. There are 50 states with 50 consumer protection statutes, and all 50 of those offices just watched Marshall go first, and nothing bad happened to him for it. The cost of being the second attorney general to do this is a great deal lower than the cost of being the first.
Blake Montgomery's TechScape newsletter at The Guardian has the surrounding context. OpenAI has been slowing its pace of development since the hack, and the company's leadership has been talking in public about persistent AI cyber attacks. The line was that we're hitting a different chapter. The same newsletter covers ChatGPT for teens, so the public posture is caution. Right at the moment, a state government is asking for the private record.
And those two things pull against each other in a specific way. Every public statement about how seriously you take a risk becomes the yardstick the internal documents get measured against. If your chief executive says the attacks are persistent, and the record shows the July containment review was somebody ticking a box on a Friday, then the distance between those two things is the consumer protection case. It has nothing to do with model weights or capability. It's what did you say and what did you actually do?
We'll come back to what a state can compel. Ahead of that, 9 people are indicted in Taipei over servers that ended up in China, and Axios breaks down what a data center actually costs. Then 3 agent harnesses in a single day, plus a paper on what compaction does to your safety rules. After that, a migration benchmark that 8 frontier models mostly fail, and a robotics paper that puts a gate between the planner and the motors. Taiwanese prosecutors indicted 9 people on Monday over 74 high-end AI servers that made their way to China. Reuters broke it, and Al Jazeera has it this morning. Among the 9 are employees of NVIDIA and of Supermicro. 74 servers isn't a rounding error, and it isn't a warehouse either. It's a specific, countable number of machines with serial numbers on them.
What gets my attention is where in the stack the enforcement falls. Export control is written against companies and against countries. This is 9 individuals at the assembly end, the people who handle the boxes and sign the paperwork. That's a very different deterrent. A company absorbs a penalty as a cost of doing business. A named person facing a criminal charge in Taipei doesn't have that option.
Indicted isn't convicted. We should be plain about that.
We have charges and a count of servers. We don't have a verdict, and who directed whom is what a trial exists to establish. NVIDIA and Supermicro having employees among the accused also doesn't tell you the company's new. It might. It might equally be 9 people running a side business through a supply chain that was designed to move fast.
There's a Bloomberg piece from Mark Anderson the same day about Chinese state-linked groups running operations on open-weight models, Kimi K3 and DeepSeek among them. That one sits next to the indictment without being the same story.
That's a different mechanism entirely. The servers are a hardware diversion story with a customs paper trail, and that's why there's an indictment at all. Someone filed a form. The open weights piece has no paper trail because there's nothing to divert. You download the weights, export control binds the top of the stack, the newest accelerators and the biggest clusters. It doesn't bind the part where somebody pulls down a good open model and points it at a target. That's the limit of the export control conversation, and it's been the limit for roughly 2 years.
Jim Vandehei at Axios ran the arithmetic on data centers, and the per-project numbers explain the local politics better than any poll does. Hyperscaler capital spending is over $750 billion this year. That's up 67%, and about 3/4 of it is AI infrastructure. There are roughly 4,000 data centers in the United States, and 580 of those are hyperscale.
The project-level figures are the ones that explain the county meeting. A large project averages 62 megawatts and costs between $2.1 and $2.4 billion all in. Once it's running, it employs about 50 permanent staff. Construction is around 1,500 workers for 12 to 18 months. So, what a company is offering a county is $2 billion of capital, a year and a half of construction work, and then 50 jobs.
Gallup has more than 70% of Americans opposed to one being built near them. That's more opposition than a nuclear plant draws, which surprised me until I put it next to those employment numbers.
A nuclear plant employs several hundred people year-round, and it's a civic landmark. This is a windowless building with 50 badges. The people showing up to object are doing the same arithmetic Axios just published and reaching a defensible conclusion about their own tax base. Call that ignorance about the technology, and you've misread the room.
And it's showing up in the schedule. 75 projects representing about $130 billion were delayed in the first quarter. Governor Shapiro has been pushing back in Pennsylvania. Mike Rogers is campaigning on a moratorium, and Governor Abbott's freeze in Texas is the one we covered yesterday. Trump defended the build-out this week on a radio interview with Michael Cohen, which SiliconANGLE wrote up.
Axios also splits the environmental argument in a way I'd hold on to. Water is overhyped. Data center consumption is under 1% of what agricultural irrigation uses. Electricity is underhyped. Data centers were 4.4% of U.S. electricity in 2023, and the projection is around 12% by 2030. Local campaigns keep leading with water because a reservoir is legible to a room full of people. The grid is the actual constraint.
Hitachi Energy's number backs that up. 44% of data center operators are waiting more than 4 years for a utility interconnection, and PJM, the grid operator for a big slice of the eastern United States, has floated a proposal to cut data centers that can't generate their own power first during an emergency. PJM's capacity prices are up 11-fold.
Which is the context for a funding round from this morning. Emerald AI raised $150 million, led by DCVC and Energize Capital, at about a $1.05 billion valuation. Sri Mupidi has it at the New York Times. Emerald does flexible load management for data centers, so a facility can throttle down when the grid is strained. That is a company whose entire market is the interconnection queue. The 4-year wait is the product.
Ethan Mollick made the counterpoint yesterday, and his read is that state-level restrictions don't slow frontier progress much. I think he's right on capability, and beside the point on siting. A moratorium in Michigan doesn't stop a trading run. It moves it to a state with spare transmission capacity. And the state that says yes gets the 50 jobs and the substation.
There's a carbon number in The Guardian this morning too, from Pip and Neil. 2 English data centers, one in Buckinghamshire and one in Bedfordshire, account for about 4.5 million tons of emissions a year between them, which is more than ExxonMobil's entire UK footprint. The jurisdiction is different and so is the grid mix, so I wouldn't map it onto the American fight. But it's the first time I've seen 2 named buildings compared to an oil major, and the buildings win.
3 agent harnesses came out yesterday, which is a good excuse to talk about the layer between the model and the work. The first is Headlong, from Andy Konwinski. It's an open-source micro-harness for persistent agents, and Lauda has the write-up. The pitch is small and long-lived, an agent that keeps running rather than one you invoke.
The Hacker News discussion is more useful than the announcement. 76 points, 28 comments, and most of the argument is about data isolation and multi-user state. Which is the correct argument to be having? Once your agent persists, it accumulates memory, credentials, and half-finished work, and now you have a multi-tenant problem inside a component that was designed as a loop around a model call.
Second is Vetta from Naive. Their claim is cost, 29.8 cents per finished long horizon task, against 87 cents for Claude Code and about $1.10 for Hermes, on the same model and the same tasks.
Vendor self-reported on their own task set, so I'd take the ratio and leave the decimals. The ratio is interesting on its own though. Same weights, same problems, and a 3-to-1 spread in what it costs to finish. The weights didn't get smarter. The loop around them got cheaper.
Third is a paper rather than a product. AutoSaddler ArcIV 2608.23041 treats harness improvement as offline learning from failure traces. You run the agent, you collect the runs where it failed, and you learn edits to the harness from those traces. They report plus 9 points on GAI-A2, plus 9.6 on SWE Bench Pro, and plus 10 on Terminal Bench 2.0.
The ablation is more instructive than the headline gains. There are 3 findings. Deep debugging of a failure beats shallow reflection on it. Targeted modifications beat letting the system edit the harness freely. And selecting changes for generalization beats repairing the specific trajectory that failed. All 3 argue against the obvious approach. Give a model unconstrained edit access to its own harness and it will overfit to the last thing that went wrong.
3 releases in a day is a busy day, not a turning point. None of the 3 says what happens when 2 of these agents share a machine, or who's accountable when a persistent agent does something at 3 in the morning on a credential it was handed in March. Konwinski's commenters got to that first, which usually means the operators are ahead of the release notes. There's a paper out from Zerhoudi, Mitrovic, and Granitzer, Archive 2608.22752. It measures what happens to safety rules when an agent's context gets compacted. They ran Claude Code's compact prompt on Sonnet 4.6 across 20 production agent configurations. After 1 round of compaction, 53% of the safety rules survived. After 5 rounds, 10%.
The abstract puts the mechanism in 2 sentences, so I'll just read it. Quote, "A safety rule and an episodic log compete for the same tokens in an AI agent's context. When the budget overflows, both are summarized at the same rate. Only the rule needs exact wording to remain enforceable." End quote.
Give me the concrete version of that.
Take a rule like, never write to production without an approved change ticket. Summarize it well and you get something like, follow change management practices. A human reads those as the same instruction. An agent can't act on the second one. There's no ticket in it, no approval step, and no production boundary. The summary is accurate, and it's also unenforceable, which is a strange property for a safety control to have.
They propose an alternative, and they call it knowledge triage. In plain English, you sort what's in the context into 3 buckets. Some material gets summarized the usual way, some gets broken into pieces and stored so it can be pulled back later when it's needed, and some gets preserved word for word, because its exact wording is what makes it work at all. Rules go in the 3rd bucket.
Their results hold up across the range. 2 to 4 times more rules preserved at every compression ratio they tested, and 96% recall across 5 rounds. Push it out to 50 rounds and their approach holds 100% against 73% for the baseline. They also released the whole collection they built it on, which is 396,934 agent configurations, scraped from 54,628 public GitHub repositories. That's the artifact I'd go download today.
2 things to keep straight. Those degradation numbers belong to these 3 authors, not to Anthropic. Nobody at Anthropic published a 53 and a 10. And this is separate from the effort remapping change we talked about on Saturday, even though both involve the same product. This is about what a summarizer does to an instruction, and it would be true of any harness that compacts. SWE Refactor Bench, Archive 2608.23564, is a benchmark for whole repository migrations. There are 20 of them, across 4 kinds of technical debt. The grading runs in 3 stages. A migration audit checks that the change was actually made. Behavioral tests check that nothing broke. And 6 independent agents inspect the result in an agentic verification stage.
The headline is brutal. They ran 520 attempts across 8 frontier models and 26 configurations. 28 of those runs passed all 3 stages, which is 5.4%. 13 of the 20 tasks are unsolved by any model in any configuration, and the best single score is Claude Opus 5 at 47 out of 100.
They have a name for the characteristic error, which is blindness. The agent reads the original implementation and reproduces it in the new framework, so the code moves and the debt comes along with it. That's what a junior engineer does under time pressure, and it's what makes a migration worthless.
There's a distribution detail I keep going back to. Of the 340 runs that passed the migration audit, 58% get to 99% of the behavioral checks. Only 26% get all the way to 100. So the models get almost everything and then stop. On a migration, the last 1% is the whole job. A migration that's 99% done is one you can't ship and can't roll back.
Category matters a lot too. Build-toolchain rewrites average 31.4 out of 100. Language rewrites average 5.6. Changing how the thing gets compiled is tractable. Changing what it's written in mostly isn't.
Chris Tate posted the other direction yesterday. His experience is that GPT 5.6 Lunar Fast is good at migrations and ports. I don't think those conflict at all. He's supervising, reviewing diffs and steering when it drifts. The benchmark measures unsupervised completion against a 3-stage gate. Those are 2 different measurements, a strong assistant on a migration you're watching and a 5.4% pass rate when nobody is.
20 tasks is a small benchmark, and I wouldn't stretch the percentage very far. What survives the small sample is the pattern in the errors. Near-complete work, copied forward implementations, and a hard wall at language boundaries. Those are the same 3 complaints you hear from teams doing this migration by hand. The last big one is a robotics paper. Physical Agentic AI from Xinyuan Liu and colleagues. ARXIV 2608.22657. It's an architecture paper with a very specific claim underneath it. There are 3 pieces: a typed skill library, a mission planner that can't actuate anything itself, and a deterministic orchestrator that checks every single dispatch before it reaches a motor.
The measurement is what makes it more than an architecture diagram. Adding retrieval raised the planner's grounding from 51% to 96%, which is a large improvement by any standard. And the well-informed planner still dispatched between 23 and 29% of the steps that had a fault injected into them. So making the planner smarter closed most of the gap and left 1/5 to 1/4 of the dangerous commands going through anyway.
With per-dispatch enforcement turned on, false dispatch goes to 0%, and they report no false blocks, so the gate isn't simply refusing everything. They also run a held plan ablation, the same plan with the gate off and then on, which is the control you need before you believe any of it.
The live trial is the number I'd put in front of a robotics team. Without enforcement, all 8 injected faults crossed the boundary and 6 of them produced actual motion. With enforcement, all 8 were refused before anything moved. 6 robots that moved when they shouldn't have, in a controlled setting where somebody was trying to make that happen.
Most of that is gazebo simulation, with 2 physical trials on a Unitree G1 and a Go 2. Simulation and hardware aren't the same evidence, and the paper doesn't claim they are.
This connects to the permission primitives paper from Sunday and the drone segment yesterday. Both of those described a boundary between a planner and an actuator. This one measures what crosses that boundary when nobody's checking, which is the number those 2 conversations were missing.
Adjacent to it, Generalist raised about $200 million, led by 8 VC, per Dan Primack at Axios, 2 months after a $400 million round. Robotics foundation model money is arriving faster than the safety measurement is.
Quick ones to close. OpenAI published a ban on a Russian influence operation using its models, and their own write-up has the line, "I'd keep." The case, quote, illustrates how influence actors can use AI as a supporting tool within a broader effort to manufacture authority. Supporting tool, not the engine. That's a more modest and more accurate description than most coverage of this manages.
There's a study alongside it, ARXIV 2608.21389, with 504 participants and 2,438 judgments. Under sustained exposure to AI-generated content, people's ability to detect fake news degrades by 10.2 points, while their ability to detect whether something was machine-written stays flat. So you keep the skill of spotting the machine and lose the skill of spotting the lie, which is the wrong one of the two to lose.
Semi-analysis via Forbes says NVIDIA is about 5 times cheaper than AMD on one GLM 5.3 serving configuration, and that the gap sits in the serving software rather than the silicon. That's one configuration on one model from a vendor-adjacent analysis house. I'd hold it to the same standard we set on Friday for the cursor bench cost column, which was, show me the number under an independent harness.
And Thomson Reuters announced a frontier model of their own, built on an open-source base. Hacker News has it at 114 points and 45 comments. The detail I'd keep is the base. A legal information company shipping a frontier-branded model without training one from scratch says something about what open weights are now for.
Which loops back to where we started, though I'd hold the connection loosely. Alabama is asking one company for documents about a system it built itself. Thomson Reuters is shipping a system built on weights somebody else built. Those two facts don't resolve into a thesis today.
Alabama's response deadline is the next concrete thing on the calendar. Whatever OpenAI hands Marshall's office will be produced under seal, and it may be months before any of it becomes public, but it exists now in a way it didn't on Sunday. That's Braid for Tuesday, August 25th. That was Dan Reval, and I'm Lenar Kess.